Meet the Author began in 2017 with Armando Correa's book, The German Girl, and this is our 6th season at Congregation Toradel. I want to thank our committee, our local and our distant audience members, but I especially want to thank the B'nai Sholem Bethel Charitable Foundation for their financial support, which enables us to do this. I also want to thank Beth Sholem in Manalapan, Congregation Avahat Olam in Howell, and Congregation Beth Israel in West Hartford, Connecticut, for joining us today. They are part of a group of synagogues that we worked with throughout COVID, and we're delighted that you're able to be here today as well. I would like to tell you what the next 2 programs will be, just so you can put some dates aside. On March 12th, we will have Matthew Daub, and his book is Leaving Eastern Parkway. And on May 7th, we will have Mira Cook, and her book is The Full Catastrophe. So I'm going to introduce our new host, Robin Schneider, who will introduce our author. But let me end this little introduction by saying that the positive reception for the Meet the Author program has confirmed our belief at Congregation Toradel that there is a need not only in our synagogue, but in the larger Jewish community to engage in a dialogue about Judaism that is accessed through the joy of reading. And we're delighted that all of you are here, and we know that you are people who love to read. With that, please stay muted. Please put your questions in the chat as we go along. When Jonathan Dunsky is finished, we will take all of your questions through the chat. Thank you so much for coming, and let me introduce Robin Schneider, also a member of our committee, and she will be introducing Jonathan.
Thank you, Allison. So Jonathan was born in Israel. After spending 4 years in the Israeli army, he worked as a team leader in various high-tech firms and had his own search engine optimization business, and lectured in the faculty at of business management in Tel Aviv University. He has a degree in computer science and business, and that was, as he says, his prior life. He also lived several years in Europe. He began writing in his teens and then took a break for close to 20 years. He's a native of Israel. Jonathan did not grow up speaking English at home. As a teenager, he decided he wanted to master the language and started reading books in English and checking unfamiliar words in the dictionary. It's a habit he keeps to this day. He is the author of Adam Lapid Mysteries, a series of historical events set primarily in Israel in the 1940s and 50s. A longtime student of history and an avid reader of crime fiction, Jonathan has combined his 2 passions to create a protagonist, Adam Lapid, a Holocaust survivor who works as a private detective in the early stages of the State of Israel. The Adam Lapid series numbers 7 novels. Death in Jerusalem is number 7, and 1 short story so far. Jonathan is in the midst of writing his 8th novel in the series. In addition, he has published a standalone thriller called The Payback Girl and a number of short stories in various genres. He resides at home in Israel with his wife and 2 sons, who we may hear from later today. So turning that over, Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Robin, for your lovely introduction, and thank you all for coming. I would like to tell you about an event that happened to me on the January 7th, 2021. I was sitting in my home in Israel, and I opened my computer, and I went to a news website, and I saw footage from the day before in Washington, D.C., and I was watching supporters of former President Trump storm the Capitol building in Washington in an attempt to prevent the transfer of power to Joe Biden. And as I was watching this footage and as I was understanding what was happening there, my mouth literally fell open because I was watching history repeat itself. For at the time, I was writing A Death in Jerusalem, which takes place or begins at an event that I now call Israel's January 6th, but which happened 69 years before that fateful day in Washington. And I'm referring to the storming of the Knesset on January 7th, 1952, by protesters in Jerusalem who were furious about the Israeli government's intention to commence negotiations with Germany for Holocaust reparations. It was a moment in history that pitted two giants of Israel against one another. On one side, we had Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, then leader of Israel, and on the other, we had Menachem Begin, then a leader of an opposition party called Cherut, which is the ancestor of today's Likud party. And it was a moment that threatened to tear Israeli society in two and perhaps even spark a civil war. And it's an event that curiously is hardly ever talked about these days, and that many Jews, perhaps even most Jews, are completely unaware of. The reason why I wrote about this event, the storming of the Knesset in 1952, the reason why I said a mystery novel that begins at that event is not something that was inspired by January 6th, even though there are a lot of parallels and similarities between these two events. I knew 2 years before I began working on A Death in Jerusalem that I was going to set an Adam Lapid mystery at that time. And in fact, I had already written the first few chapters, including the chapter that depicts that historical day in Jerusalem, the demonstration and the storming of the Knesset, before January 6th happened in Washington, D.C. The reason why I wrote a book set in that time, why I had to write it, is because of who my main character, Adam Lapid, is and his backstory. Adam Lapid is a native of Hungary, and there he worked as a police detective. And Adam Lapid, of course, was an Hungarian Jew, and along with his family in 1944, he was sent to Auschwitz Birkenau, where he lost his entire family and only he survived. Adam later moved or immigrated to the land of Israel, participated in the War of Independence, and when the series begins in 1949, he is working as a private detective in Tel Aviv, solving mysteries and attempting to rebuild his life after the trauma that he went through. Adam is haunted by memories of his dead family, and he struggles with survivor's guilt. He has frequent nightmares, and he is a changed man because of his experiences in the Second World War. He is also a former Nazi hunter, and as I said, a soldier. And naturally, Adam Lapid has a great deal of anger and even hatred toward Germans and Germany. And I knew that he would find it appalling that Israel would even consider negotiating with Germany for Holocaust reparations, as did many Israelis at the time. So I knew that this moment, the storming of the Knesset, would be a perfect backdrop to illuminate more aspects about Adam Lapid and about his life and about Israeli society in general. And as a storyteller, I also knew that this was a dramatic moment and it would serve well as the backdrop of a novel. But as in all Adam Lapid novels, this is primarily a historical mystery. It is not a history book or general historical fiction. Before I tell you a bit about the mystery in A Death in Jerusalem, I'd like to tell you about that day, January 7th, 1952, because I know that many American readers in particular found the book very interesting in that regard because of what happened on January 6th. So what happened that day in 1952 in Jerusalem, and how did Israel get to the point in which Jewish protesters fought Jewish policemen just outside the Jewish parliament in Jerusalem? As many of you may know, when the Nazis came to power in Germany in 1933, they began confiscating a great deal of Jewish property. This happened before the war in Germany and later in Austria and Czechoslovakia when they were incorporated into the Third Reich. And of course, once the Second World War began, a great deal of Jewish property was stolen during the Holocaust itself. As early as 1939, when the Second World War began, some Jews began campaigning for eventual compensation for that stolen Jewish property, basically planning for the day in which Germany will be defeated. And this became a more mainstream and common demand of Jewish organizations worldwide and of the Zionist movement in what was then mandatory Palestine. But during the early years of the Second World War, and even as far as 1944, the main focus was on property because the horrific scope of the Holocaust was not yet known. Once Germany was defeated in 1945, it was burdened with a great deal of wartime reparations for all the countries that it had attacked and subjugated. But the Jewish people did not have a country. So Chaim Weizmann, who was then president of the World Zionist Organization and later became Israel's first president, submitted a claim to the Allies on behalf of the Jewish people as a whole for reparations. And the basis for this claim was that because most or much of the stolen Jewish property was now without heirs because of the Holocaust, these reparations should go to the Jewish people as a whole. And Weizmann basically made the claim that the World Zionist Organization should be recognized as a representative of the Jewish people. But this claim was rejected by the Allies because it was the only claim for reparations made on behalf of the people, but not on behalf of a country. And the Allies simply did not know how to handle that or did not want to recognize the World Zionist Organization as a representative of the Jewish people in its entirety. Moving forward a few years, the State of Israel is established in 1948, and it wins its War of Independence in 1949. In the meantime, Germany is divided into two countries, East and West. The East is a communist satellite controlled by the Soviets, and West Germany is basically occupied by the Western Allies, the United States, Britain, and France. And it has a new chancellor called Konrad Adenauer. Also by 1949, it is apparent that at least West Germany is undergoing an economic miracle. And this was actually the term used at the time to describe the amazing economic revival of West Germany from a ruined country after the Second World War to an industrial powerhouse in just a few years. And this economic revival raised the possibility again of West Germany being able to pay reparations for Jewish Holocaust survivors and perhaps for the Jewish people in total. Israel's economy, on the other hand, was in a terrible state. Israel had gone through a horrific war of independence in which 1% of its Jewish population had perished. It had virtually no industry to speak of. It was under continuous threat of invasion from all of its Arab neighbors, so it had to spend a great deal of its very meager budget on defense and security. And in addition, Israel in its early years absorbed a massive influx of Jewish immigration, and it basically doubled its population in just 3 years, from about 600,000 or let's say 700,000 to about 1.5 million. And most of these Jewish immigrants came with virtually nothing. Either they came from displaced persons camps in Europe, where the Allies had basically collected Holocaust survivors and Jewish refugees, or they came from Muslim countries such as Iraq and Yemen and other countries. And the Jews that came from there also had to leave nearly their entire property behind. So there was a great deal of fear in Israel, in the Israeli government, that Israel would not be able to feed and clothe and house its growing population. And in fact, many of the new immigrants that came in those years did not have housing. They lived in shanty towns called ma'abarot that were supposed to be this temporary stopgap where people lived in shacks and sometimes even tents with no running water or electricity and basic amenities. And some of them had to live there for a good number of years. To try to basically provide the basic needs of this growing population, the government of Israel controlled the economy from above, directing the economy in its entirety. And in addition, it enacted a strict rationing regime. Food was rationed very specifically, and people got very little. The government also created a clothing line to provide just rudimentary clothing to all of its citizens and even furniture. But all these efforts did not stop the downward economic spiral that Israel was experiencing in the late 1940s and early 50s. As far as Israel-Germany relations were concerned, there were none. Israel maintained a boycott of Germany. If you applied for a passport at the time in Israel, in the passport, it was printed that the passport was valid to all countries, for all countries, apart from Germany. If you wanted to travel to Germany with an Israeli passport, you had to ask specifically for that to be removed. Israeli society, Israeli citizens in general, boycotted German products, and Germany was considered the devil because of the Holocaust. But because Israel was in such dire financial straits, it found itself in a position in which it needed to get reparations from Germany in order to continue to function. Because the government at certain times in those years, in 1951 in particular, was worried that in a few weeks they would not be able to even to provide flour to bake bread to provide the entire population. So Israel needed these reparations from Germany, but the idea of negotiating with Germany was so abominable for even in the eyes of the Israeli government that in 1950 and again in 1951, the government voted against negotiations with Germany for Holocaust reparations. Instead, the government tried to enlist the Allies as intermediaries because the idea of sitting in the same room with German officials, it created such an aversion that they wanted some middleman in between to make it more palatable. But the Allies refused. East Germany did not even consider itself responsible for the Holocaust. The communist line was that they had completely denazified Eastern Germany. There were no Nazis there. All the fascists and Nazis were on the Western side, where the imperialists were in control. That's the communist logic. So East Germany did not even respond to any demands for reparations because they did not believe, or they did not state that they were in any way responsible. As for West Germany, the Allies at the time had other things on their mind. They wanted West Germany to be a bulwark against communism, and they did not want to saddle it with more reparations and more demands. So they said to Israel, you want to deal with the Germans, go ahead and deal with them yourself. And Israel was basically at the point in which it had no choice but to make contact with West Germany in order to see what could be done to get reparations to keep Israel alive. So contact was made with West Germany in 1951, and in September 1951, Konrad Adenauer, the West German chancellor, rose up in the West German parliament in Bonn, and he made a speech there saying that terrible things were done to the Jews in the name of the German people, and that these require both a moral and material compensation. It was a speech that basically tried to minimize the responsibility of Germany in its entirety, but did take responsibility for things done, as he stated it, in the name of the German people. In December 1951, it became widely known in Israel that contact was made with West Germany, and that this contact, against all odds, might actually result in an agreement for reparations. And the issue became a political firestorm in Israeli society. The opposition to the idea of negotiations with Germany came from all sides. The head rabbi of Israel was against it. Partisans, people in academia, people in the arts. There was widespread opposition to it. One of the major newspapers in Israel at the time ran an informal poll among its readers, and it reported that 80% of them were against negotiations with Germany. The opposition came from both the right wing and the left wing. At the time, Israel was ruled by a sort of center-left party, and opposition came, as I said, from all sides. There were people who were not against getting reparations from Germany in general, but they did not want to negotiate directly with Germany. But there were others, like Menachem Begin and his party Cherut, who were against any sort of contact with Germany, direct or indirect, personal or national, and they wanted nothing to do with the Germans. The Germans were to be boycotted for all time. So I'd like to tell you some of the moral arguments and the practical arguments of those who were opposed to that agreement, or the idea of negotiations with Germany, and those who supported that. So the moral claims of the opponents were that this would be a betrayal of the dead just to negotiate with Germany, and also to take money from them. It would be a desecration of Jewish honor, the Jewish honor that had so recently been fought for in the creation of Israel after 2,000 years of persecution and humiliation. They said that Jews will be seen as people who were willing to sell the memory of their dead, of the 6 million dead Jews, and perhaps it will even bolster a common anti-Semitic trope of Jews being interested in money. And it will also be seen as absolving Germany. Germany was still trying to find its way back into the, let's say, honorable community of nations. And some people said that if the Jews made a deal with Germany, it will enable Germany to come back and be a part of the community of nations again. The practical argument was that by negotiating with Germany, by making a deal with it, it would allow Germany to rearm itself, to rise up again as a military power, and to start a new world war and a new Holocaust. And this may seem in hindsight to be a sort of a ludicrous idea, but at the time, this fear was something that was voiced by very serious and intelligent people who have streets named after them in Israel to this day. As for the Communist Party in Israel, or the socialist parties, they also said that making a deal with West Germany will put Israel firmly in the capitalist side of the Cold War, and they didn't want that. They wanted Israel to be aligned with the Soviets. And some of them said that, some of the opponents said that even if by some miracle or there will be an agreement with Germany, Germany will only agree to pay a fraction of the stolen Jewish property, and of course, a fraction of what it should pay for all the Jews that it murdered, and that it may even renege on its obligations at all. As for the supporters, they said, first of all, we have to get this money because the country is in a terrible, terrible state. And it's also a sin to let the Germans keep it. Why let the murderers also be the inheritors? And they also said, and this was true, that the process of West Germany's reacceptance to the community of nations was already undergoing, and that even if Israel continued to boycott Germany, this process could not be stopped, and they were proven right. Before I get to the demonstration that happened on January 7th, I'd like to tell you about the animosity and even hatred between David Ben-Gurion and Menachem Begin, these two giants who were about to clash heads.
Over there. The purple one.
Could
This
you mute yourself, please? Thank you.
Move the bag back. Move back the bag. Just
Okay,
one, you
well,
know. you
someone has to move, has to mute themselves.
Susan, perhaps you should mute everyone and then I'll unmute myself again. That would
Right.
be easiest, I think. Okay, so as I said, Israel was about to have a clash of the titans in a way, with David Ben-Gurion on one side and Menachem Begin on the other. And these two gentlemen hated each other with a passion. Just to give you an idea of what the sort of things that they used to say about each other. When David Ben-Gurion had his first government in 1949, Menachem Begin referred to it as a Judenrat government. This was before the thing with the process of negotiating with Germany. So he called it a Judenrat government for not continuing the war, I believe, the War of Independence, and capturing the entirety of the state of Israel. David Ben-Gurion, on his part, used to belittle Menachem Begin in the Knesset by referring to him not by his name, but as the person sitting next to member of Knesset Bader. And this was because Menachem Begin used to sit next to a member of Knesset called Yochanan Bader. So when Ben-Gurion would give a speech, he would not even deign to use Begin's name. So on January 6, 1952, the matter of whether Israel should negotiate with Germany for Holocaust reparations was put before the Knesset. The government wanted the approval of the legislature to begin this negotiations, and 3 days of debate were scheduled. The following day, on January 7th, 1952, in the afternoon, it was a cold and rainy day in Jerusalem. Cherut, the party of Menachem Begin, organized a mass demonstration in Zion Square, which was a short walk away from Fruman House, which was where the Knesset held its sessions in those days. Some say 5,000 people attended, some say as many as 15,000. It was a massive amount given the population. About 1% of the population perhaps took part in that demonstration. You can imagine, if you take the population of the United States, what that number would be. I would like to show you a few pictures of that day. There were not a lot of pictures taken that day, but I would like to show you a picture of the demonstration taken, I believe, from a balcony of one of the buildings. You can see the crowd assembled in Zion Square. And if you look closely, I believe you can see it the best in the lower left-hand corner. You'll see sort of things pinned to the lapels of people's jackets and coats, and these were yellow stars. People put on yellow stars to protest the very notion of negotiating with Germany. The police, on their part, were prepared for some sort of disturbance, even though no one imagined what was about to take place. So I'll just share a couple more pictures. Here are a few policemen erecting a sort of barricade of barbed wire, which did not last for long. I'll give you a little spoiler, and they're getting ready to protect the Knesset from whatever disturbances might take place. And here they are again. Here they are again, standing in line. I believe this is on King George Street, but I'm not sure. And what's strapped to their chests are gas masks, because they thought that they might need to use tear gas in case something were to happen. So there were thousands of people gathered in Zion Square, a few minutes walk away from the Knesset, where the debate was at that time raging. And a few people from Cherut took the podium and gave their speeches. And it seemed like a regular demonstration, very emotional, but it seemed that nothing big was going to happen. And then Menachem Begin took the podium and began his speech. And Begin was a masterful orator. And his speech that day is a masterpiece of rhetoric and, let's say, in a way that reaches into the heart of anyone who listens and drives them to action. And of course, that speech was given in Hebrew, but I did translate a few snippets from that speech that I would like to share with you, and then give you a brief explanation to what Begin is referring to and what he means by what he says and what that meant for Israel at the time. So Begin says, I call upon Mr. Ben-Gurion, do not commit this act. You are placing a bomb under the house of Israel, which may come crashing down on its inhabitants. I say this for the blood that was spilled in Majdanek and Auschwitz, and so you would not have to bow your head before the Gentiles. Therefore, I say to Mr. Ben-Gurion, there will be no negotiations with Germany. On this matter, we are ready to surrender our lives. Here Begin is making a historic, emotional appeal, and he's also stating that this will be a struggle in which lives will be lost. He's basically saying that this will be an armed conflict. Begin continues, there is no sacrifice we won't make to thwart this scheme. Mr. Ben-Gurion has stationed policemen, and in their hands is tear gas made in Germany, the same gas that suffocated our forebears. He has prisons and concentration camps. Ben-Gurion may be older than me in years, but I am older than him in resisting an evil regime. And this I declare, evil confronts a just cause, and it will shatter like glass against rock. Here Begin is stating that Ben-Gurion's government is an evil and illegitimate government. And we're talking about the elected government of Israel. He is making a claim that they are like the British that ruled the land of Israel before Israel was established, and even like the Germans, because Ben-Gurion has concentration camps and he has given gas made in Germany to his policemen. He's also saying, reminding the people listening to him that he, Begin, has experience in fighting against an evil regime. Begin was leader of the Irgun, one of the main underground movements that fought against the British and drove them out of the land of Israel. And so Begin is basically saying that he has experience in fighting an evil regime, and that the evil regime is now the Israeli government. Now, Begin must have known that the tear gas in the hands of the Israeli policemen was not the tear gas, not the gas used in Auschwitz and Treblinka and the other death camps, but he is using the word gas in order to inflame the crowd, because you can imagine what connotation gas had for those people standing there, people who were either in the camps or lost their immediate family members in the gas chambers. Begin continues and he says, if need be, I shall renew the war. And in this war, we will be accompanied by the spirit of the millions of all countries, from the ovens and the gas chambers, who have commanded us no negotiations, a boycott on Germany for all time. Here Begin, when he says that he will renew the war, he is referring to the violent campaign that he waged as commander of the Irgun against the British. But now he is setting his sights on Ben-Gurion's government as his enemy. He also makes it clear that when some people said we should negotiate with Germany, this is no longer Nazi Germany, this is a different Germany, he's saying that there is no different Germany and that there will never be a reconciliation with the Germans. Begin says, when you shot at me with a cannon, I gave the order no. Today I give the order yes. Indeed, you will not show us any mercy, but this time we shall not show you any mercy. This will be a war to the death. When Begin says that, when he says, when you shot at me with a cannon, he is referring to an incident called the Altalena incident, in which the Irgun, during Israel's War of Independence, the Irgun chartered a ship called the Altalena in Europe. and brought on it a large cache of weapons. And as the Altalena approached Israel, David Ben-Gurion said to Menachem Begin, "We are now a country with one army. You need to surrender all these weapons to the Israeli army." And Begin was a bit hesitant to do so because he wanted to keep part of that weapon cache to Irgun fighters fighting in Jerusalem, which was then still supposed to be an international city, not part of Israel yet. And when the Altalena approached, they still had not negotiated an agreement, and Ben-Gurion ordered soldiers to wait for the Altalena and to open fire on it. And Begin at a certain time was even on that ship when it was fired upon with small arms fire and with a cannon. And while he was on the ship, he gave, and afterward when he disembarked, he gave an order to all his followers in the Irgun to not retaliate, that there should not be a civil war in Israel between Jews. So when Begin says, I gave the order no, but today I give the order yes, he is basically saying, today I will give the order to my followers in the Irgun to fight you, the government, over this decision. And this is not an idle threat. The Irgun was made up of highly competent militants. These are people who blew up hotels, who blew up police stations of the British, who did battle with the British Empire and emerged victorious. So this is something that anyone listening was very well aware of and would take very seriously. At the end of Begin's speech, he exhorts the crowd to march on the Knesset, to march on the policemen guarding the Knesset, and to make basically their feelings known. And at the same time, he went to the Knesset to give a speech as one of its members. So part of the crowd began marching on the Knesset, where they were met by several lines of policemen. And they reached very close to the Knesset. And while Begin was giving another fiery speech inside the Knesset itself, calling Ben-Gurion a hooligan and various other nasty names, a street battle began outside the Knesset, just outside its doors and windows, between the line of policemen guarding it and the crowd of agitated protesters. Some of the protesters hurled rocks, breaking the windows of the Knesset, and one member of Knesset was hit on the head with a rock. The police officers used tear gas, and some of the gas seeped in through the open windows into the Knesset, and some of the members of Knesset dispersed because of that. David Ben-Gurion, by the way, stayed in his seat because he said that if he were to evacuate, it will be the end of Israeli democracy. So there was a massive battle just outside the Knesset, and you can imagine the scene. And at a certain point, one of the police commanders, came to Ben-Gurion into the Knesset and asked for approval to open fire on the protesters. And Ben-Gurion gave them strict instructions under no circumstances were they to use their firearms. After a lengthy battle, which required even the reinforcement of army troops, the protesters were pushed back. None of them made it inside the Knesset. Over 100 officers were injured, and there were many injuries among the protesters as well. Hundreds of them were arrested, and basically the debate in the Knesset on that day was stopped. What happened in the aftermath? The next day, Begin and Cherut were excoriated in the press. And if you read A Death in Jerusalem, I give an example of one major newspaper columnist who was against negotiations with Germany, but he still said that what Begin did was worse because he threatened Israeli democracy, Israeli sovereignty even. And this demonstration allowed Ben-Gurion to pass more easily even the government's proposal to begin negotiations with Germany in the Knesset. It was approved. I believe the vote was 61-50. Begin and Cherut continued to protest against negotiations even while they were in progress. So this was not the final demonstration that they did, but it was the only violent demonstration that they did. Eventually, Germany and Israel came to a controversial agreement. Germany agreed to pay Israel 3 billion German marks over a 10-year period. This was paid in goods, not in cash, in German goods and machines and stuff like that. And in addition, they paid 450 million marks to the Claims Conference, which is an organization representing Holocaust survivors outside of Israel. These were not personal reparations. These were not reparations made to Holocaust survivors. Those compensation and reparations and payments came later. These were reparations made from Germany to the state of Israel because Israel had absorbed so many Holocaust survivors, and at least in some way, in a major way, was the representative of the Jewish people. The reparations improved Israel's economy tremendously, and it allowed Israel to build its industry and to lift its population, much of its population, out of poverty. The agreement, oddly enough, revitalized and even saved Menachem Begin's political career. In Israel's first election in 1949, the Herut party got 14 seats in the Knesset out of 120. In the second election, which took place about 6 months before the demonstration that I told you about, Herut only got 8 seats, and Begin went into a sort of a period of dejection and political inactivity because of that loss. And he was on the verge of quitting politics. He even started trying to get new prospects in law, I believe. So this fight over reparations gave him a lot of renewed energy. And without this agreement, or without the whole business of negotiations with Germany and Holocaust reparations, I don't believe that Menachem Begin would have become Israel's prime minister in 1977. And he later won the Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating Israel's peace with Egypt. No one at the time would have imagined that Menachem Begin would ever negotiate a peace agreement with anyone or win the Nobel Prize for Peace. Israel and Israel-German relations deepened from that moment, and full diplomatic relations were established in 1965. I'm talking, of course, about West Germany. East Germany was not part of that picture. Those arrested on January 7th, 1952, in the demonstration, remained in jail for several days or weeks, and some even a few months, until Ben-Gurion was sure that things have calmed down. But none of them was ever charged with any crime for taking part in that violent demonstration. Ben-Gurion was magnanimous in his victory, and I believe that he saw it as better for the country not to pursue criminal charges against these people and not to make martyrs of them, and also because he knew that they'd acted out of a matter of conscience. A Death in Jerusalem, which is the book that I wrote that begins in that demonstration, I'll just say, I'll put it another way. Adam Lapid, in the first chapter, takes part in that demonstration, in the storming of the Knesset. He is also inflamed by Begin, and he's sort of propelled with the crowd to do battle with police officers to try to get into the Knesset and to scream his objections into Ben-Gurion's face, into the ministers' faces. And he is arrested, and he is sprung from jail by a powerful man in Israel because he wants him to investigate the mysterious death of his daughter, a Jerusalem nurse. And much of the novel takes place in Jerusalem, which was then a divided city. The eastern parts of Jerusalem, including the Old City and the Wailing Wall, was controlled by the Kingdom of Jordan, while the western part was the capital of Israel. And along the book, the situation in Jerusalem, it being a divided city, cleaved into, mirrors the social situation in Israel in its entirety, because Israeli society was also split into over this matter of Holocaust reparations. And Adam Lapid himself finds that he is separated from those closest to him because of his taking part in that demonstration. And in the novel, Adam not only has to solve the mystery for which he has been hired, he also needs to come to terms with what the Israeli government is about to do, and to find a way that will allow him to remain an Israeli patriot while hating what his government is doing. And during A Death in Jerusalem, it seems that Adam's world, the world that he is slowly rebuilding, is coming apart, that he is losing many of the people that he has managed to connect with. And just like Israel, he is a man that he is on the verge of, or he feels the tension from all sides, and he is also maybe in danger of being ripped apart from within. And one of the themes of A Death in Jerusalem, one of the themes of the mystery in the story, is money, dirty money, whether you should take it and what you can do with it, and when it's moral to use it. Now, I won't give any spoilers about the story itself, because I imagine that some of you have not read it. So I'll end my presentation by just saying a few things about the Adam Lapid series in general, where it's at now, and what are some of the plans for the future. As Robin said, I believe in the beginning, there are currently 7 novels and 1 short story in the Adam Lapid series. The series begins with 10 Years Gone, that takes place in 1949. And all the books but one take place in Israel between 1949 and 1952. The exception is book 6, The Auschwitz Detective, which is a prequel novel that takes place in Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1944, when Adam Lapid is a prisoner there, and he is engaged in solving the murder of a young Jewish boy within the camp among the prisoner population. All 7 novels are available in ebook, paperback, large print, and hardcover, and the first 5 are also available in audiobook. And the same narrator is currently working on book 6, and he will get to A Death in Jerusalem after that. I'm currently writing book 8, which takes place in Israel later in 1952, and I plan to write more novels after that. I believe that book 9, as I plan it at the moment, will take place in a displaced persons camp after the Second World War and before Adam Lapid made it to Israel. I will say that 10 Years Gone, book 1, was recommended this year by the Jewish Book Council as one of 10 fiction novels for book clubs, and that A Death in Jerusalem received a glowing review from the Jerusalem Post and a number of other Jewish publications. In addition to the books, and this is something that I cannot promise, but it's in the works, there may be an Adam Lapid tour in Israel later in 2023. This is something that is still, I'm not certain about it, but it's something that I'm working on with a guy who runs tours in Israel that will include various locations from the Adam Lapid books, a lot of Israeli history from that time, and of course, general Israeli sites that you may already have visited and are familiar with. So that's it for me. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
So Jonathan, first of all, thank you for that history lesson, because forget being a lecturer on business and computers. You are a fabulous lecturer on history. So one of the questions I have is, do you choose the historical fact first, or do you come up with an idea of something you'd like Adam Lapid to investigate? Which comes first?
So A Death in Jerusalem is the only book that the date was in my mind before the story itself. other than that, I just get an idea for a story, place it at a certain date, and then read up on what was happening at the time from newspapers that were printed in Israel at the time and from various other historical resources. The book that's set in Auschwitz is set during the summer of 1944, because that was when the destruction of Hungarian Jewry was taking place in Auschwitz. So that had to be there then, but it wasn't something that I chose, okay, let's write a book about that exact month. It was only because that was when Adam Lapid arrived in Auschwitz, and it was also when Auschwitz was its deadliest. So that gave it that idea. And The Auschwitz Detective was the hardest book to research and to get everything right. And it was also the sort of craziest idea that I ever had. Because you can imagine that writing a mystery novel set in a factory of death is, of course, something that's unique and not so easy.
Do you repeat other characters in your books besides Adam Lapid?
Yes, Adam has several side characters that he is involved with. The favorite character is a woman called Greta, who runs a cafe in Tel Aviv, and some people may even like her better than Adam Lapid, and she is the favorite side character, and she appears in all the books apart from the one set in Auschwitz. He has a friend who works in the police on a police force called Reuben Sanani, a Yemenite Jew. He has not exactly a friend, but an acquaintance reporter called Shmuel Birnbaum, who appears in several of the books. And I actually believe that Adam Lapid's discussion with Shmuel Birnbaum about the reparations issue in A Death in Jerusalem may be the most dramatic scene in the book, even more than those involving actual violence and danger. And there's one more, I believe. He has sort of a romantic entanglement with one woman who appears in several of the books, but I believe that's it.
Is Greta's Cafe going to be on the tour? Is there some place that you think would be part of the tour that you're thinking about?
Greta's Cafe is fictional, and some people actually suggested that I open the cafe. That's not going to happen, but I may have certain surprises regarding Greta's Cafe in the next, let's say, month or so. But okay. I'll keep it vague for the moment.
Now, did you read books in English? I mean, I know you taught yourself English. Did you also read books in English while you were growing up?
I took that upon myself when I was, I believe, 13. Of course, we studied English in school, and so we had rudimentary language. And in Israel, the television is not dubbed, so English and American shows are just, we have subtitles. We still get the language. We still hear the language being spoken. So that helped. But I just picked a book, started reading it very slowly and checking each word in the dictionary, and I kept it up for a few years until basically I was the dictionary, and I still do this to this day. Today with ebooks, it's easier because you just tap the word and the definition pops up. But that decision enabled me to write books in English.
You don't have very much of an accent. How did you manage to do that? To get rid of your accent and sound American?
I did not make any effort on that part. But when I speak, I often confuse my idioms, use the wrong subjunctive, stuff like that. Writing is easier because, of course, you can edit it later and get rid of all your silly mistakes.
Well, you're managing to convince us. Allison, you had a question? Did you have a question, Allison?
Yes, I wondered if you could talk a little bit. We spoke briefly before the program began about Adam Lapid's age. And my vision of him was, of course, an older man, which would be understandable as someone who had come out of a concentration camp. But you also alluded to him being ripped apart even from the friends he had made in Israel. Can you talk a little bit more about his social isolation? Because that comes through so clearly in his character.
So Adam Lapid, as I basically said that I basically decided that he was born in 1915, and this was to allow him to serve a certain number of years on the Hungarian police force, to become a detective there. So you needed to serve a few years before you can logically become a detective, and so from that, his age is derived from basically that. So he's 37 at the moment, and the way I envisioned him is as a loner, because he finds it very difficult to put the past behind him, and because he suffers from such a powerful survivor's guilt, that he feels that should he rebuild his life, let's say get involved with a new woman, start a new family, he will be putting his old family more firmly in the past and sort of breaking apart from them. And this is something that he is still unable to do, but he is slowly finding new things to, let's say, put more color in his life. In the books, his apartment is described as basically a cell, a monastic cell. He has very little, he finds very little material things to enjoy. So he's someone that basically still has one foot in the past. He clings to his memories. He does not want to relinquish them or to move past them, because he just imagines himself to, he fears that the guilt will overwhelm him if he does so.
Thank you.
Is there any talk about a TV series or movies based upon Adam Lapid?
There has been some little interest, but nothing tangible so far. But all it takes is one producer to decide that he would like to do something with them, and I believe it will happen. Yeah, one day soon, sometime.
Are you are you sending the books to a producer, or have you reached out to anyone, or is anyone reaching out on your behalf? Do you know?
I do have someone who is able to represent me, but we haven't made any much effort on that part. But there has been from time to time people asking about TV rights, but so far nothing has come out of that. But it's a long process. Most books never get turned into a TV show or a movie.
Well, now we have a lot more channels.
Yeah.
And we
The best
have-
thing,
Yeah, Robin,
best-
Eleanor has her hand up, and there's another question in the chat. I'm going to ask Eleanor to unmute, and she can ask her question.
All right, thank you.
My question is, since you're so, that Adam Lapid is practically part of you, do you ever find that something you've written for Adam Lapid to do is something you wish he hadn't done? I mean, does he get into your head? And
Adam Lapid is different from you. He is not. He believes in vigilante justice to a certain point, but I sort of take. Let's say I'm in a forgiving mood about him in general. So I understand the things he does, which are sometimes outside of the boundaries of the law, and of course his participation in that demonstration, in the violence that occurred then, is illegal and immoral even. But I understand where he was coming from, and so I just take a more forgiving attitude about the things that he does. And he himself, it comes across very clearly in book one. He himself knows that he has changed, that he was changed by what he experienced, and some of it may not be for the better, but he has a different view of the world following Auschwitz and the Second World War. So he believes that what he does is right, even though he knows that let, he says it in 10 Years Gone that his father would not approve of some of the things that he does
Yeah.
were he to know him that day, or as he is now, as he has become. But I don't see much to dislike about him.
Uh-huh.
At least I don't.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you very much for coming.
Was there a model for Adam Lapid, someone you knew or someone you spoke to or someone you had heard of?
Not at all. Some people, there is not one mold of how Holocaust survivors behaved. Some people got, of course, remained, got depression. Of course, it's understandable. Some people, of course, had nightmares, but other people just started to gobble up life. And I know this personally from a story that my grandmother told my mother. My grandmother lived in Tel Aviv, and she told me that one day she was sitting in a dance club or in a cafe that had dancing, and a woman sitting next to her started telling her about how awful things were in the camps, and then she sort of said, "Okay, keep my bag. I'm going to dance." Just one sentence after the next. So some people basically got a hunger for life. But I just decided on a different approach. And of course, being a detective, a private detective, they usually begin as lone wolves. It makes it easier, and that's why so many detectives operate alone. Often they don't have families, and even if they get involved with someone, it often doesn't last, because it's, at least the fictional detectives, are usually people who operate on the gray zone of society.
Do you, we talked earlier about you're working on your 8th novel. Do you have any date that you think that next one will be available?
Not at all, because I'm a very slow writer, but I will put it up for pre-order soon, just to sort of prod myself to get it done, because I already have the cover and title and everything apart from the book itself is ready to, and I even contracted the same audiobook narrator, on standby for when the book is finished, that
Do
he
you
will.
want to tell us what the title's going to be?
It will be called In That Sleep of Death.
And that's Leave It Death. Susan,
Which
I
is
see
Shakespeare,
someone.
by the way.
Yeah, there's someone with a question, but there was a question in the chat. What made you choose a hospital? Do you see that one?
A
No, I
hospital?
didn't. So go.
I'll
And a
read
Death
it.
in Jerusalem.
Yeah, what made you choose a hospital and medical professionals in the characters in Death in Jerusalem? And then also on Emily.
No particular reason. I did not plan the book in advance, hardly at all. It was just something that, just let me think if there was a reason. No, I don't think there was. But I think that, well, in part, making someone a nurse makes it easier for the reader to sympathize with them, especially as it's someone that they never meet, because she's already dead before the story begins. So that's part of it. But I don't think there was any reason at all.
Okay, Emily,
Emily has-
okay. You can
Hi,
go ahead and
I'm
answer your
I'm here in
question.
Florida and I'm head of the book club at Temple Emmanuel in Palm Beach. And I want everyone to read some of your books. And I wonder, are they all available as ebooks for Kindle?
Yes, and also from other digital stores.
They are. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Allison, we're
I have one question before we go.
okay.
You alluded to the fact that you kind of didn't plan the story. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process?
I'll just say that if someone were to ask me for a recommended way to write a book, it will be the exact opposite of how I do it. I would recommend planning the book in advance, having an outline, and just writing it according to that plan, with, of course, whatever changes come into your head as you go along. I've never been able to plan a book in advance, so I don't. I just start with some sort of inciting incident. In A Death in Jerusalem, it was Adam Lapid being hired to investigate the death of this nurse. In 10 Years Gone, someone is hiring him to find a missing baby, and various other crimes like that. And usually I just start writing and try to get out of my way. Because if I manage to get out of my way, stop being so critical and fearing that the book will not work, I get into a flow and somehow the story emerges from somewhere in my subconscious where all the stories that I've absorbed and accumulated over the years have are resting there and where story comes from. And on every book I get stuck and I tell my wife, this is going nowhere. All these words will need to be discarded. And she reminds me that you say this with every book, but for some reason I've not been able to convince the critical side of my brain just to allow myself to have fun and write the books more faster. I have no idea why. I think that I have this sort of fear that the books will not work. So the end product is, I'm very satisfied with it across all 8 novels that I've written, but it takes a long time to get there, much too long, at least in my opinion.
Jonathan, you mentioned that you're a mystery lover. Can you talk about who your favorite mystery writers are?
My favorite writer is Lawrence Block, who has written, I believe, over 100 novels across 60 some years of his career. And he has my favorite character of his, and he has several, is Matthew Scudder, who is a private detective in New York, who is also a loner, by the way, at least through most or at least part of that series. If the best book that I read in 2022, which is also a mystery, is 5 Decembers by James Kestrel. And you can actually go to YouTube and find a video review that I did on that book, which is for certain one of the top 5 mysteries that I've ever read in my life, an exceptional historical mystery that I warmly recommend. Other than that, I enjoyed Faye Kellerman's novels, Michael Connolly, and a bunch of others. I mean, there are too many to recollect at the moment.
Thank you. Robin, back to you.
Well, Jonathan, it has been a delight having read your book, having you teach us about Israeli history. And on behalf of everyone, I want to thank you and wish you well in the completion of your next novel. Allison?
I have nothing to add, just to thank everyone for coming, and hopefully we will see all of you at our next events. Jonathan, thank you so much. We will be looking out for your next book.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been an honor.
Thank you, everyone. You can
Thank you,
say
everyone.
goodbye if you like.
Bye.
Hey, Jonathan, check out J.A. Jance.
Okay.
Have you read J.A. Jance?
I haven't, but I'm familiar with the name. You cannot escape her. She's written so much. So
The bookstore that I was telling you about